Let's get this video filmed because I have some Chipotle that needs my immediate attention. Hey howdy, welcome back. I read some books in April and I'm gonna tell you about them. The first book that I read was Scarlet by Marissa Meyer, which is book number 2 in the Lunar Chronicles. And this one started out a little better. It has like a hate to love trope in it, which is one of my favorite romance YA tropes. So I was like, okay, I can maybe get behind this. And then it got ruined by the fact that it was really weirdly violent. I won't spoil it, but there's just some weird things with the romance there that just had me going, ooh. I want to say that I'm not going to continue it because I didn't like this book that much, but also I don't know when to say when, and I just can't quit things in the middle of them. So we'll see. I gave the book overall 2 out of 5 stars. The next book I read, I actually have a physical copy of, and that was Paper Girls Volume 6. I love this series so much. It has my heart. The art in it is absolutely incredible. This is the final volume, so it's a little thicker than the other volumes before it. But I just love the characters, and I ended really well. Like, the thing I really like about this book is that it makes sense because it has time travel elements in it, which I think a lot of times can be kind of glossed over as part of the story and not actually make sense. I feel like this book dealt with that issue really well. I didn't feel conflicted about the ending. The panel structure in this issue, they are telling, like, there's 4 different characters and they're telling 4 different stories on, like, the same page. And each panel is a different storyline, which I really love. Cute lesbians, the 80s. I loved it. It was great. The next book I read was Hold Still by Nina LaCour. This book made me sob, which I should have been expecting because her other book also made me sob. There's something about her writing that is not necessarily sad, depressing writing. It's just so bluntly put that it's like, yeah, that's what it is. That's what you feel when this happens. And that sentence didn't make sense at all. But it was really good. It took me a lot longer to read than I thought it would, despite being a short book, just because it's so emotionally heavy, especially for me right now. The only thing I felt like it could have done better was that the main character, Caitlin, was holding a lot of guilt towards her best friend's death, and blaming herself for a lot of it, and I feel like that never really got addressed. I feel like she, at the end of the book, still felt the same amount of feelings of guilt, and I would have liked that to have been touched on just a little bit more. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. Next book I read was my ebook for the month, Yellowbird, Oil, Murder, and a Woman's Search for Justice in Indian Country by Sierra Crane Murdoch, and this book was so good. When I picked it up, I knew that it was going to be about a murder. I knew it was going to be a true crime book, but I think they addressed the issues that are on the reservation so well. It also portrayed all these issues through the lens of an actual Native American woman, which to me was so important because Crane Murdoch is white, and so to me, I think it was just so important for her to take that lens and make sure that she was looking at the story through this woman's perspective rather than her own perspective, which I think she did phenomenally. This book follows the story of a Native American woman named Lissa, who has had not a super great life. She was involved in drugs from a very young age. She went to prison, and then after getting out of prison, she was, just trying to get back on track. In that period of time, on the Indian reservation that she grew up on, Fort Berthold, which is in North Dakota, suddenly a man goes missing. He was working for a trucking company that was transporting water for the oil rigs, and it is about her journey to find out what happened to this man and find out what his relationships to the people in the oil company had to do with his death, and find out what the Indian reservation is kind of covering up in terms of the oil. And it is amazing. She worked so hard to get justice for this man, and I thought it was so good. The way it's set up into two parts. So the first part is called Boom and the second part is called Bust, which I really liked because the first part talks about the oil boom on the Fort Berthold reservation and how the oil rigs came to be on the reservation. And then it also talks about, you know, how this story of this man going missing, how it catches on, how suddenly it becomes this big thing through this woman's like advocating for justice. And then the second half, Bust, shows kind of what happens when the oil industry in North Dakota starts declining and what kind of is happening now currently, and then also goes along with what happens after the murderers are caught and justice is served, which I loved the setup of. I loved the parallels between those two stories. So even though the crime is, you know, a fairly smaller story, it's placed into this much larger timeline and story. And it was so well done. Like, it was so well put together. That's all I can really say. Originally, when I finished the book, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, but I think if I went back, I would give it 5 out of 5 stars. The reason I gave it 4 out of 5 stars initially was because I thought it was going to be a lot more about the crime, and a lot more of it was about this woman named Lissa and her life, like more than I thought it would be. But I think it was just so well done. Like, the way Sierra Crane Murdoch put this book together is truly an achievement. And also she included a whole section in the ending too about how she felt like this wasn't her story to tell, and how because she was white she felt like she didn't really have the experience that the Native American people had had, and she was concerned about, you know, portraying it that way. And I think that as a writer, that is such an important view to have on your work, especially in situations like this, is like, I don't know this, these people know this, and these people are writing the book. I'm just giving them the way to do it, the voice to do it, which I thought was really cool. Not an issue that gets attention, and it is so important. Like, it is the economy in these places and the living conditions in these places is absurd, and it's not being fixed, and it hasn't been fixed for years. Literal hundreds of years. It's such an important story. It really is an important story. And also, the actual crime story within it is insane. Like, the amount of cover-ups and murder for hire and all this stuff that goes into it, like, it's the kind of thing where if it was written in a fiction book, you'd be like, oh, that's not very believable, like, what? But it's not, it's nonfiction, it really happened, and this is exactly how it happened, and that's just absolutely crazy to me. So yeah, it was really good. I know I'm going on about it forever. The next book I read, or I didn't read it, I listened to it on audiobook, was Hood Feminism by Mikki Kendall, which is an analysis of feminism and the way that Black women and other minorities are treated in feminism. This book was really interesting. I felt that it was very accessible, even if you know, wouldn't regularly consider yourself a feminist or maybe somebody who's very active in feminism. I think it's still really easy to understand, very easy to see where she's coming from. Mikki Kendall is very gutsy. She's got like a little bit of bite to her writing, so I think it was very entertaining. It was definitely an important book, especially as a woman who is not part of a minority. It's really important to make sure that you're actively getting that perspective, especially if you are somebody who wants to fight for the rights of women, which I, of course, am. I do believe it's important that we look at all perspectives and not just our own. The only issue I really had is that she spends so much time emphasizing which groups are minorities. In making sure that she included all those people, there never was one mention of women with mental illness. Which, as a woman with mental illness, I do feel like there is a lot of things that kind of get brushed over. And so it would have been nice to see a little more of that. Also, I would like to say that this book did have discussion of domestic violence, which I did not know when I went into it, so I just want to let you guys know if that is something that is triggering to you. I gave Hood Feminism 4 out of 5 stars. Next book that I have is another one that I have a physical copy of, and that is The Marriage Plot by Jeffrey Eugenides. This book is about a woman named Madeline who has just graduated college, and she is on the rocks with her boyfriend named Leonard, and then she also has this other friend named Mitchell who they've kind of had like an off and on thing for all of her college life, and it's just about them trying to figure out kind of what they're doing with their lives, where things are going, and who they are as people. I love Jeffrey Eugenides' writing because he makes things that are ordinary and stories that are ordinary into something that is meaningful. And this is exactly what that book did. This book is the book that he wrote after Middlesex, which won a Pulitzer Prize, and I think that it's really hard to follow up a Pulitzer Prize winning novel. And so this definitely is not one of my favorite works of his. It's actually probably my least favorite out of all four of them. But I did enjoy it. I did still really enjoy it. The characters that I hated the most at the beginning of the book, I ended up liking the most at the end of the book. They had the most character development, particularly Mitchell. He starts out as, you know, this dick who's kind of one of those, like, I'm a nice guy, why doesn't she like me kind of guys, and he turns into this person that's really good. He's a good person by the end of it, and who genuinely cares about people and the people in his life. And I also really liked that one of the main characters had bipolar disorder. This book takes place in the 1980s, so throughout the whole book they're calling it manic depression because that's what it was referred to back in the 80s. Bipolar didn't exist. They hit the nail on the head. Like, all the descriptions of what it feels like to be manic and what it feels like to go through that depression and what it feels like to be trying all these different meds during the section where it's told from Leonard's perspective, who's the character with bipolar disorder. I really was like, yeah, yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. So I really appreciated that. I always appreciate when we have a bipolar character in novels, and he wasn't necessarily an antagonist either. He wasn't necessarily a protagonist, but he was growing, which, you know, I really appreciate, because a lot of times people with mental illness are portrayed as bad or not what the main character is looking for. But he wasn't. He was portrayed as, you know, a person. And I really liked that. The main character, Madeline, I did have a few issues with. She was very, very shallow. But once again, I think that's kind of the point. I think that this book is very self-aware in that it's pretentious, and a lot of the main characters they don't start out as good people at all, and some of them don't even end up being good people in the end. But I think that's the point. I think the point is to acknowledge those flaws that we have in our character as a society and as people. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars overall. All of his other books I've given 5 out of 5 stars, so this one is definitely not my fave, but I did like it a lot. The next book that I read is The Girl from the Other Side. This is the 3rd volume of this manga, and it was adorable. Like, I really don't have anything else to say about it besides that. It was absolutely adorable, as they always are. The main character, this little girl, Shiva, she is so brave and so strong and one of the most lovable main characters. And just her relationship with Teacher and her ability to trust what her heart tells her and not what other people are telling her is so inspiring and fantastic, and I loved it. I'm definitely going to be picking up the next volumes in this soon so I can read them. Also got 5 out of 5 stars. The last book I want to talk about today is Signs, The Secret Language of the Universe by Laura Lynn Jackson. I actually have not technically finished it yet. I have, like, I think 30 pages left or something like that, but I'm going to talk about it in this video anyway because I'm almost done and I'm pretty sure I know what I'm going to rate it. This book is good in that it is very hopeful. It is very reassuring of the fact that death is not the end, even if it feels like it is. Death is not the end of our connection with our loved ones. That goes on forever. Love goes on forever. And it really, really drives that point home. Like, I think this book could have been 100 pages shorter because a lot of it is just the same story over and over again of how somebody had somebody they loved died and they received a sign from them and then they felt better about it. And that is essentially the whole book. And a lot of the stories are really touching, but in my personal opinion, I just think it got a little old after a while. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. And that's the end of all the books I have. I've got something special planned for my May TBR, so make sure you check that out. I hope you enjoyed this video. But if you didn't, I don't